Hi and welcome to yet another session of Financial Fridays. We started the series back in the beginning of 2021 as MoveMe, based on what we learned was the most dynamic, one of the most dynamic aspects of shared mobility, like financial feasibility and profitability. Cities and users love to see sustainable mobility alternatives, but if they aren't feasible operationally, then such services become unreliable as they are forced to exit the market sometimes. I'm Venkatesh Gopal from MoveMe. We are shared mobility consultants. In the past 7 years, we've been involved in over 70 projects across car sharing, bike sharing, mass, and policy advisory. And we worked across projects in US, Canada, Europe, and Latin America, Middle East. We co-create innovative transportation solutions for cities to reduce the dependency on the private car. That's something that drives us every day. And I'm so happy to have similar-minded people join us today, Leanne and Josh. They've been working with MoveMe in certain projects and in certain aspects over the years. And this month, in this session, we'd like to shine a spotlight on shared micromobility and running financially viable operations. And this is why I got two of the operational experts on the panel today. So why don't you introduce yourself for a little bit before we get into some of the questions? Maybe we'll start with you, Leanne, and then go to Josh. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. My name is Leanne Buhler. I work for BCAA on a team called Strategic Ventures, and we work closely with teams within BCAA like Evo CarShare to run and launch new products and services. And for the past 24 months or so, we've been working on launching Evolve e-bike share under the private sort of sector to start us off in micromobility. You probably know, but Evo CarShare is one of the largest free-floating car share operations in North America. We have over 1,900 shared Toyota Prius, and now we've got 5 Kia Niros, fully electric cars in operation. And now we're bringing electric bikes to our fleet in certain areas, starting with businesses. So we currently operate Evolve e-bike share for private organizations where they want to offer fleets of e-bikes to their employees for commuting, for running errands, for recreation, but generally just wanting to offer more sustainable transportation modes to their employees. So we've had a lot of success in that sector, and we're really looking forward to expanding e-bike share and other shared forms of micromobility to businesses and to cities in the coming year.
Thank you so much and welcome again. Yeah, Josh, maybe.
Sure. Thanks for having me again. I'm Josh Moskowitz, the Chief Operating Officer for Shift Transit. Shift Transit is an urban mobility operations company. We manage more than 25,000 mobility assets on a day-to-day basis across North America. We've got experience managing the operations for some of the more prominent car sharing, scooter sharing, bike sharing, and microtransit companies throughout North America. Our scope of work includes everything from rebalancing, recharging, technical troubleshooting, and maintenance and repair.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. I'm so happy that we got like this kind of a mix in this panel now, and it was great to. I mean, both of you have. Josh has worked in Vancouver. Leanne, you are in Vancouver. So am I. So it was great to like touch base with your team at BCAA. Try the Evolve e-bike last week at the TransLink New Mobility Forum, and I'm sure Josh had a try too while he was here last week. Yeah, it was fun. So we obviously everybody on this panel now we love micromobility, right? So it's pretty obvious. So in that case, so let me just kick it off with like an introductory question, which is like what do you like about micromobility, shared micromobility, and our city is making it easier for such businesses? Maybe we'll go with you, Josh, and then go over to Leanne after.
Sure. So it's a great question. I think at its heart, micromobility allows people with access to affordable, environmentally friendly transportation, which I think is the main reason why a lot of us are in this business, is to provide our constituencies with options that don't involve private vehicle ownership. I grew up in New York City, not owning a car for years, and one of the rites of passage for any New Yorker is your parents give you a Metro card when you're about 12 or 13, and send you on your way. And it really opens up so many doors, public transit, that maybe cars wouldn't necessarily allow you to do so. So that's the reason why I've chosen a profession in micromobility. And to answer your second question, I think we're at a really interesting point in the industry's evolution, specifically related to city and government relations. I think almost everyone agrees that micromobility is a good thing, that providing citizens with access to scooters, bikes, car sharing vehicles, microtransit options is a good thing. But the nuts and bolts, sort of the ins and outs, are still being negotiated. And I think we're at an interesting point with how do we balance all of these competing interests between what cities want and what some of these private sector companies want at the end of the day.
So Richard put, now it makes all the more sense of why you're so hell-bent into micromobility, because you're a New Yorker. That is great, thanks. And in that sense, flipping over to Leanne, same, maybe your thoughts on what you like about shared micromobility. You obviously love shared mobility. You've been with BCAA for some time, done the car sharing, and then now micromobility. Why so? And then how are you finding this line of business in terms of cities?
First of all, I think it's really interesting. Josh's sort of coming of age experience at 16 is to get a Metro card, but growing up in Metro Vancouver, outside in the city of Surrey, it's very different. It's the classic, you get your first car, or your keys to your parents' car at that age. So a very different world, that we grow up with and end up in the same place, which is kind of interesting, kind of a fascinating insight. Like Josh, I think micromobility is so interesting because of the sort of real impact that it's having. And, it's not a gimmick. E-bikes and e-scooters and pedal bikes, it's not just something that we use for fun and recreation. And, it's not sort of like those people who do cycling and active transportation. It's now this like real and viable mode of transportation for people, which I think is so interesting. And we're seeing the benefits of that all over the place. We're seeing reductions in carbon emissions when people are subbing, e-bike trips or car trips for e-bike trips or scooter trips. We're seeing reduce congestion, the amount of micromobility we can fit in a city versus cars. It's pretty incredible. We're seeing that people are getting more active. I think the NABSA report reported out 12.2 million more hours of active transportation that would have been taken by an auto trip. And really, like, they're making cities more accessible. So bringing people closer to more jobs, connecting with other shared and public transportation. So I think it's just a very exciting space to be in, and it's moved so quickly. which is probably, where some of the challenges and opportunities come from for cities. But that's why I'm passionate about it. I mean, there's real impacts to the world and real impacts to myself and my community. So I think that's really exciting, and I'm quite passionate about it for that sense. To your second point about, what cities are doing to make it easier for business or to facilitate these kinds of programs. Some of the things that I'm hearing that is really great is the level of collaboration between regions and, the connection and the talking between them to make sure that our policies and bylaws are, similar, that, when an operator operates from one city to the next, it's not a completely different set of rules and regulations, which really just trickle down to the users. The users are going to get a consistent experience across regions, hopefully, as we expand in Metro Vancouver and to other cities. So I think that's really exciting, and that's a real challenge, I think, that we heard of and had some apprehensions about in the early days, is that every city was going to have sort of a different system, a different type of rules, docked, dockless, electric, pedal, scooters, no scooters. And so I think that we're seeing, cities really come together and share their insights and learnings, which is only going to benefit, operators to have some consistency across different cities. So I think that's one thing. The other thing I would say is we're seeing a real push for infrastructure, and cities really recognizing that they need support from other places other than their own sort of tax generation. So funding and government grants for bike infrastructure, more bike lanes, secure bike parking for shared mobility and non-shared mobility, like, just people's personal bikes, that kind of thing. And so really seeing the movement there that cities are responding to the demands and the fast pace, to be frank, of this industry and the volume of bikes and scooters and stuff that we're seeing on the street. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also, good insight that you pointed out, Leanne. So policies are micromobility is fairly new, right, to cities. So that way, it's still going through, compared to the car and the electric car and all that, it's like quite early stages, infancy, but still there is so much of familiarity with like e-bikes and those modes that people know how these fit in the city. So, but at the same time, yes, to your point that the policies are becoming more consistent across cities. But at the same time, it's about what fits that city, right? So it also becomes like hyper local, whether a city can manage dockless or has to go like with a docked solution, right? So we know City of Calgary has had a quite generous, I would say, policy when it comes to like scooter sharing, not restricting sidewalks and those kind of things, but also that's in their perspective, it's acknowledging that it's not going to be possible for them to put out protective bike lanes everywhere, so they can't do that. And those are definitely things that push ridership, and then that way it's operationally feasible. While we say infrastructure, but at the same time, when it comes to then operations over time. And maybe I'll take this question to you, Leanne, first, and then take it to Josh. What does it take to sustain, so to speak, financially, operations over time across multiple municipalities? So to your point, yes, the policies are consistent, but some are not. So for example, you have one city with, say, a different kind of rule for sidewalk, but then the other one is different. The rider education levels are different. The collaborations that you need to do, like with supporting groups for bike share or scooters or whatever, it could be different. So as an operator, how do you think you want to look at it, and how would you consider those things?
Yeah, we're in early stages of developing e-bike share services. So that's that's kind of new operations for us. But I don't think it's that different from the work that we do with car share. And we were at this point in time 7 years ago when car share was new as well. And I think, it's the way to sustain operations is not really dollars and cents on operations and revenue. It's really about focusing on customer needs and the evolution of customer needs, and making sure that the product is really fulfilling their demands and their requirements in a city. And customers aren't just Evo or Evolve customers, but it's other residents of the city. So, when we're working with municipalities and we're working with businesses, all of them are customers as well. And so thinking about operations from a sustainability perspective, it's really about coming to the table and continuing to advance products and processes and offerings to make sure that we are sustaining ridership and we're staying relevant, and making sure that as the industry changes and as road use changes, as transportation evolves in the city, that we can meet those needs. And really that's how we drive sustainable operations. And so that's kind of like, a really sort of high level answer. I think if we were to get more granular, what I see, and Josh is probably way more versed in this, but really just managing operational costs through innovation and through iteration on products, and to make sure that we're running an operation that makes sense and growing slowly and sustainably, so that we're not creating too big of a scope for what a city can manage and for what the demands are. So we've been very successful with that, with Evo Car Share, sort of growing from city to city and expanding based on their growth and their density, as well as sort of making sure that the product is changing and iterating and evolving sort of as we go. But Josh probably has some really great comments on that as well from an operational sustainability perspective.
Yeah, sure. I think Leanne hit the nail on the head with demand. I think first and foremost, there has to be organic demand for the products and the services that we're providing. This is not something that you can force on people and just sort of hope and pray that people end up riding bikes or scooters or getting into car sharing vehicles. There has to be a real need for these services. And then, once you've been able to sort of establish, that idea, then it comes down to just providing a really reliable, accessible service. Because if, the demand is there, people are going to want to be using these services, and it's our jobs, as operators, to ensure that people have a really excellent customer experience every single time they're in search of a bike, a car, a scooter, a microtransit van. And so, yeah, technology, I've been in the industry for, almost a decade now, and the evolution of operations technology has come a long way. And we've been able to really leverage and harness a lot of innovation in the technology space and the fleet management space to be able to stay ahead of the demand curve, which has been, super helpful. Especially in places like, Toronto. We manage the Bike Share Toronto bike sharing service, 7,000 bikes. It's a moving target every day, trying to place bikes where people need them. And the technology that we've been able to tap into allows us to do that in a really productive, beneficial way to the end user, which is our riders.
Yeah, I think that because it's like we need something like a bedrock, which is the organic demand, people biking or people wanting to bike, and then you provide something, and then that way the other thing is something that sometimes cities do, or sometimes something like a pandemic, right? So an external force comes in and then just disrupts everything. So that could make or break depending on what the operation was relying on. And we've seen that in the past. So to your last point, Josh, you also mentioned that it's about making sure that we are working with cities, and we are making sure that these vehicles are at the right place at the right time for the users, right? So both of you have seen the car sharing operations, which is like breathing cities. It goes out, goes in at specific time of the day. Micromobility is the same, because that's how we all move across cities, right? So, and in that sense, Josh, you also mentioned negotiations, right? So I would also say that it's creative negotiations across cities, and you are the best person to shed some light on that, because not like negotiations, but then your experience transpires even borders, right? So you've done Canada, you've done US, not just different cities, different countries. So that way the regulations could get quite inconsistent in that sense, right? What do you think has been one of the challenges, or one of the things that you always keep in mind while creating these services, while managing operations across such municipalities?
So I think one of the most important, features of a successful mobility service is that people have to see it, right? These mobility devices, they are the best, form of advertising. I'm sure Leanne can speak to this as well, but the best, it's a moving billboard at the end of the day, for the service. And so I think it's paramount that cities provide clear-cut access to the curbside space or sidewalks, for these services. People want to be within a 3 to 5 minute walk of the nearest, bike sharing station, the nearest scooter, the nearest car. Again, that comes back to reliability, right? Like, if we're going to offer a convenient alternative to private vehicle ownership, these things have to be readily available, and they have to be available on demand. And I think, most cities control the curbside space, and providing, curbside access to cars, to scooters, to bikes is really important. And, that's typically pretty easy, because cities also, they also sort of, set the rules and the regulations for who has access to curbside space. So cities making it easier. I think making it easier for mobility, companies to have access to that curbside space, maybe making it for free, which I know is something that certain cities don't necessarily agree with. But I think if we all want these services to exist, having unfettered, cheap, inexpensive access to the curbside space is really helpful. And then on the private sector side, I think fast forwarding maybe 5 to 10 years from now, I think we're going to get to a point where there will be mobility hubs throughout major metropolitan areas, where cities will be able to feature bikes, scooters, cars in designated areas, throughout a jurisdiction. Because one of the things that I think still needs to be addressed is this fear, this concern about micromobility clutter, and some of the ADA issues, with providing safe access and passageway for people who are just walking down the street. And these mobility hubs really allow for that. And so I think public sector and private sector companies, I think at the end of the day, they all want the same outcome. It's just figuring out the ways to get there, and to do it successful.
I know. It's something that both of you have been reiterating, that this is the same. We all want the same thing, right? So it's just about making it work. So interesting that you mentioned mobility hubs, and it's one of the one of the very passionate subjects that we've come across recently, and for a while, I would say. So in that sense, I just wanted to stick with that point and then pick your brain a little bit more, Josh. So how important would that be to diversify business models? So let's talk about in mobility hubs, if they are not private, if they are not public, right? So if these mobility hubs are behind the gate or hosted by private organizations, how does operations differ? And then, so does it benefit? Does it not benefit having that kind of a mix when you have like a B2C, like bike share for the public and bike share for certain employees or that kind of thing? Is it easy to manage operations? What are the nitty-gritties there? And then is it a good thing to like put your eggs in two baskets, so to speak, if things go wayward with the demand?
So I think having designated areas where these mobility devices live, whether it's B2B or B2C, it's just much easier to operate from an efficiency perspective, from a streamlining perspective. At the end of the day, it's much easier if you know that there are specific locations where people need to be able to end their trips. I think from the consumer side, right, it is a huge benefit being able to potentially, park, quote unquote, anywhere within a given service area. But again, I go back to some of the concerns that cities have about, scooter clutter or scooters being strewn, on the streets. And I think a healthy alternative to that are these mobility hubs, where there are designated areas, throughout a given municipality where the operator knows this is where I need to pick up bikes, scooters, potentially cars from. And it also enables cities to be able to I think, hit some of these goals and mitigate some of the concerns that they have, around dockless, bikes, scooters, what have you. And then from an operator's perspective, being able to potentially operate bikes, scooters, cars for different companies would allow, I think, vendors, private companies to be able to leverage, some of the efficiencies that are created by having these mobility hubs throughout a city, which enables the companies to lower their operating costs and really focus on revenue generation, marketing and sales, sponsorship, et cetera.
In the same tone, then I would flip it over to you, Leanne. You've obviously seen the free-floating B2C, so to speak, like Evo car sharing, and there is B2B now Evolve, which we know is B2B as kicked off. So how important is it for you to diversify business models as an organization from the operational side of things? And does it benefit? Does it not?
Yeah, I think so the B2B model is really interesting and maybe specific to BCA or certain companies, why that's like a valuable business to also pursue in tandem with some of the public opportunities. There's different levels of convenience with shared mobility and mobility in general. A car parked inside, your garage is the ultimate convenience. Single passenger, yeah, of course, that's the most luxurious version of mobility that we have, or maybe like a ride share could top that. But there's different needs for different sort of types of people and different types of communities in a city. And so what the B2B offers is really unique. It offers companies to have just full convenient access to a fleet of bikes, just like they would a fleet of cars, for their employees to use on demand. So when we talk about reliability, and that reliability drives ridership, and it drives convenience of the system, having the bikes right in their parkade is top for reliability, so that their employees always have it for commuting and doing errands and that kind of thing. And that's important for us for a couple of reasons. One, we've got the operations in place. So, like Josh, he's got people on the ground who are doing, the operations anyway. So to hit a mobility hub where you have 4, 5, 6, 10 vehicles lined up in a row from an operations perspective is actually very convenient and efficient. And then the other thing that B2B is really valuable for us, specifically to BCAA, is it gives us some opportunities to operate outside of these dense urban cores. So where a public opportunity may not be a good fit because of density and demand, we can start offering programs, in cities that maybe are 2, 3, or 4 years away from a public operation. So getting a few B2B clients sort of is sort of a pseudo effect for offering public bike share. So in Canada, for any sort of international listeners, we're very spread out. We've got a very tiny population. There's only a few cities that are really viable for public shared programs. So offering B2B allows us to sort of touch and impact more British Columbians, which is a really important driver from BCA's perspective. So it ticks a bunch of boxes for us, but that's not the same, that's not the same use case. It's not the same sort of vision or values that all shared mobility operators function under. It's just maybe a little bit unique to our business and our sort of goals.
Yeah, I like that point that you brought in, that cities could be dense, but then there are so many cities that aren't. So B2C just becomes a nightmare to manage, right? And yeah, it's about not being operational. And correct me if I'm wrong, Josh. Yeah, but if we are not being operationally feasible, then it naturally goes into like, okay, we need more vehicles, right? So we need to put more bikes on the streets or something. But then it's not, if it is denser, then maybe you can get away with a smaller fleet and still be a little bit efficient. Of course, you need a critical mass, but for less dense, then maybe it just becomes misguiding to keep putting vehicles on and then realizing that you're not feasible anymore, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Is there any other point that you would like to bring in terms of like how cities could make B2B or B2C micromobility shared micromobility operations feasible? In that way, if then let's also package it in a little bit of like a key takeaway or last words that you would like to do in that sense before we close.
I'll jump in on that.
Okay.
I think we touched on sort of most of the hot topics when it comes to enabling shared micromobility in cities and sort of the role of a city and the role of the operator. I think what's really important to know, and everybody in the space knows, is that the industry is just moving and advancing so quickly. It's a different space than it was 24 months ago and 48 months ago. And you see that in all of the research. So, it's really about making good choices and being okay to sort of take that first step. So I think if my sort of key takeaway is that it's just really important to start moving in that direction and start taking small steps to launch micromobility in cities and try different things and try different models, because sure enough, it's going to be different in a year from now, which I think is, fun and exciting, but also very frustrating, I think, for everybody involved. So, my sort of takeaway is just to try things, and I think we're going to see a lot more sort of procurement opportunities coming up in the next couple of years here. So it'll be exciting to see how those shake out and how cities in Metro Vancouver land on their models and requirements. But I also, know that the operators are open, not just us, but all of the operators are open for conversation. And I think the cities are doing a great job in engaging and consulting with us as well to make sure that there's a sustainable model that they're creating for their cities.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I like that. It's like everybody has enough demand, right? So everybody can work together.
Yeah.
To eat each other up.
Yeah, pilots are extremely powerful, right? Like,
yeah.
If you couch something as a pilot, for those folks who may not be celebrating that they have several new mobility form factors on their streets, it sort of lessens the permanency. Every pilot project that I've been a part of, as it relates to transportation, it typically becomes permanent. Because they are, so successful and they are productive at the end of the day, enabling cities to hit their environmental goals, enabling, cities to reduce congestion. So yeah, I think, couching these new programs in cities that may not have wrapped their arms around them, as pilots, I think is one way to maybe mitigate some of those concerns. And then I think another point that I'm really interested in is just financial viability moving forward. I think if you look at any transportation or transit system, none of them are profitable. And for the most part, I think a lot of micromobility companies have run up against that. And so I think if cities view these devices as transit devices and not as maybe recreational devices, there will be some movement towards publicly subsidizing scooters, bikes, micro transit, car sharing moving forward. I do think at the end of the day, public sector and the private sector are going to have to sit down and talk about how do we make this financially feasible, so that for the private companies they can continue to exist, and for cities they can continue to offer this as a viable option, as a viable transportation option. So I'm hopeful that we'll start to see some movement on that front within the next 6 to 12 months here.
I love that. Looking at all of these options as public transportation and not something else, which drives home a lot of convenience and reliability. We are at the end of our session here. Thank you so much. But before I let you go, we are doing this mobility wish comments from all the experts that we are meeting up everywhere, like in person, virtually everywhere. And this has been one of the things that we always use, and we love hearing how experts and cities and operators are thinking about what they want, what they envision in their city or maybe in some other city that they want to, a mobility wish, a shared mobility wish, if I may. So what's your mobility wish for the next 12 months for shared mobility, Leanne?
I've got two, if I may. The first one is obviously we'd love to see evolve obviously in some municipalities here in Metro Vancouver. We're working with MoveMe and TransLink and Modo and Mobi Bike Share on a shared mobility program. And I think it fits really nicely into some of the things we're doing, is offering more mobility options in sort of an aggregated platform, which many of you know who would be interested in listening to this is a MASS program. So that would be my first wish. And my second wish, and this is plaguing everybody in the industry, is some relief in the supply chain. So it's been really difficult to keep up and to respond to demands when we're trying to plan 6 or 8 months down the road. And, to my previous points, the industry changes 6 to 8 months at a time. So, I think we're facing that, and most operators are facing that. We're facing it with car share, bike share, everything to do with this industry. So that's my mobility wish is a little bit of relief.
We love that. Josh, over to you.
Yeah, ditto on the supply chain woes that I think everybody's faced in almost every industry for the last 6 to 12 months. We'd also love to see evolve in more Vancouver cities as well. And then just something that we've observed as dock-based bike sharing operators. Very, very hopeful for dock-based bike sharing, which is one of the more older forms of micromobility. The systems that we manage, almost all of them have seen record-breaking growth really in the last 2 years, since COVID emerged, and almost all the tier one systems, including Bike Share Toronto, continue to set daily ridership records. I'd love to see additional investments into dock-based bike sharing moving forward, whether it's with existing systems, expanding the number of bikes, the stations, the docks, continuing to expand our e-bike portfolio in a number of our cities as well. And then also, having some cities that might not have dock-based bike sharing. Again, going back to the public subsidy, subsidizing the launch and creation of these systems, I think is good for everybody at the end of the day.